And welcome to Nerdstalker. I am Adolfo Ferranda at Nerdstalker on Twitter, nerdstalker.com, and all the places. Here with another wonderful guest. Morag Barrett is the best-selling author of The Future-Proof Workplace and the founder of SkyTeam, an international leadership development company. Morag's worked as a facilitator and coach with more than 3,000 leaders from 20 countries who are looking to take their performance to the next level. She's also a musician and ballroom dancer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adolfo. I'm exhausted listening to that, but I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, wonderful. So first off, this is a great book. We get tons of books to read. I'm about 50% mark here. I had 2 books to read in this week, and so I've been zipping through it, and both books have been fantastic. Yours is really quite good, and I love this topic.
Yeah, well, it's an important topic, and I think it's easy for us to assume that the future is some distant off place that if we stick our heads down, we don't need to worry about. But the reality is, and what Dr. Linda Sharkey and I explore in the Future-Proof Workplace, is actually not the crystal ball of tomorrow. We're talking about the things that need to happen and have happened right now that are impacting not just organizations and the workplace, but how each of us as individuals need to be thinking differently and future-proofing our careers.
You know, it's fascinating because in the book, you bring up this notion that we're in this transitionary period. And I think you've really nailed it because we really are. And one of the things I want to know, of course, we all know the examples of Kodak and RIM and how these companies have just, they were miles ahead and they just lost somehow. And we're wondering, it's incredibly fascinating. And the attempts also to hire external leadership only for them, to come into a company and fail because dysfunction was so entrenched, like you say in the book. Can you expand on that?
Well, there's a couple of things. If I think back to my first career, and I'm actually on my 5th career now, Adolfo, and I think that's a symptom of the 21st century, is the idea of a career portfolio versus a job for life. But when I look at my first career, which was in commercial finance, the banking industry, wherever you are on this planet, has got hundreds of years of legacy systems and bureaucracy. It is not known for being nimble. And yet in today's modern world, with the access of technology, there is a need for transformation, and letting go of just because it worked 15 years ago does not mean that those systems, processes, and approaches are going to work today. And so we need to start thinking differently in many industries, or we're going to run the risk of going the way of Kodak and the dodo and finding ourselves replaced either by the robots or replaced by the upcoming new industries that are disrupting in so many different ways.
That's such a frightening notion, I think, for a lot of people who've been in the workforce for a while, even people new to the workforce, I suppose. But one of the things you mentioned too that was really critical, I believe, was mission and vision when you on this topic, and not only that is market-driven mission statements was one of the items too that really stood out for me. What do you mean by you said add a mission statement that is solely market-driven and you have the perfect storm for corruption?
Well, I think in the 80s and 90s, and we've seen it throughout history, is greed can overtake, the drive for profit can overtake common sense and impact leadership decisions. And certainly for many organizations in the 80s and 90s, it was get the consultants in, let's create a mission statement, let's create a vision statement. And they became the fancy posters on the wall. Yet if you remove the branding, they were such vanilla statements that you probably A, didn't remember them, or they could have applied to anybody. And what we're seeing very clearly in the 21st century is purpose is what's driving connection for individuals, teams, and organizations. Why am I coming back to or coming into work every day? And to what extent is that contributing to something, not just to my paycheck, not just to the bottom line of the business, which are still very important because we all have bills to pay and we're in a for-profit industry, but also what's our purpose and what's the impact and legacy that we're leaving in the communities in which we work and operate. And that is a transformation from what's gone before.
Well, I remember though the previous old missions were, or goals even too. So we're going from 2 billion to 3 billion, or 2 million to 3 million, and that was our mission statement.
Yeah, but money and dollars, that does not incentivize. And there is so much research that shows, yeah, okay, in the short term, it might cause me to focus, but in the long term, it doesn't trickle down fast enough to make a difference to me and my performance. What we're trying to do in the 21st century is not just engage the logic and the hands, you've got to engage the heart. And that's where purpose and
Mm,
values come into play.
well, so one of my favorite quotes in the book, if you'll let me, was in relation to a football Super Bowl winner named Jason Carthen, I believe was the name. And you wrote, when you have a, or maybe he said this, when you have a toxic culture, that culture will either build a champion or hide a hero.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that scenario and what that quote means to you?
Well, what that means for me is I think too often we tolerate the brilliant jerk, the, oh, that's so and so, but look, they're getting all of these results. And
Hmm.
what we're overlooking is the damaged relationships internally and externally. And
Hmm.
over time, in my experience, this is where Linda and I get invited to work with our clients so often, is that the ripple effect of that brilliant jerk is that others start to role model it. And
Hmm.
if you are working alongside a brilliant jerk, then we hesitate. We don't take information to them. We don't want to go and butt heads with them. And therefore, over time, the decision quality is impacted, and therefore, the business results are impacted. So I think that quote really undermines why we need to focus on how business gets done, not just the what of business.
Let's see. So another really interesting touch point too was this notion of building supporters versus allies. Um, you're right. We propose that the reason so many people dread work is because they've avoided the important step of cultivating good relationships in the workplace. Now, this seems to be one of the key sort of pillars in the book as well, and one that I never realized, I suppose, was so imperative, especially as a technologist, someone who could fall back on that technology
Mhm.
strength. Can you expand on that?
Technology is only as good as the people who choose to adopt it or use it.
Mhm.
And so this links back to my first book, Cultivate the Power of Winning Relationships. And certainly
Mhm.
in my banking career, that old phrase of it's not personal, it's just business got
Mhm.
trotted out far too many times. But the reality is that the world of work, whatever industry you're in, whether it's technology, whether it's healthcare, whether it's publishing, it's a people business. So relationships matter. Your success on Nerdstalker is down to the relationship that you build with your guests and to your listeners and
Mhm.
followers. And if we aren't paying attention to that, if we aren't nurturing that, then it's a very lonely place, but also success is limited. So relationships really do matter. Business is personal.
Yeah. So another item I want to touch on too is this notion of work-life balance, right? And
Mm.
so you write, managers must face reality and allow fun, spontaneity, and other life experiences to occur. To have one facet at the cost of another means that ultimately we will all suffer. So I want to touch on that, and also I want to touch on this. I often hear this work-life balance associated, oftentimes negatively to women in general.
Well, I do think that I have to say when I hear work-life balance, I internally roll my eyes
Hmm.
because I think we've allowed it to become a conversation where it's a binary system. You're either working or you're living, and never the two should meet.
Hmm.
But the reality is we all get one life, of which work is a part of it, that enables other elements within our life, whether it's supporting the family, paying the bills, paying for a vacation or whatever. And I think we need to change the conversation around how do we better integrate both, make work somewhere where we can thrive and actually want to be, and also recognize that taking time to invest in family and social and things outside of the office environment isn't a sign of disloyalty or slacking off, but
Hmm.
a sign of investing in a holistic us.
Hmm.
And so, how you might respond to that and fill your own work life needs may be different to mine, and it certainly changes as you move through life. And as a mother of three teenage boys, work life needs now, as they become independent, they can drive themselves around, are different to when they were younger and we were, as parents, were responsible for ferrying them around and getting them to the right place and making sure they were fed.
Hmm.
And so work life becomes not an either or, it's an and conversation. And that can be very powerful. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, we see a lot of in the Valley and Bay Area here, we see a lot of these startups, right? With the
Hmm.
built-in cafeteria, built-in video games and machines and built-in parties, even midday
Hmm.
drinks and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and it becomes a culture, it becomes almost like a family or a true type of tribal type of experience. And
Hmm.
having worked in the enterprise as well, it was very not that way at all.
Yes, I mean it's going from what I've described as the meerkat cubicle farm, where the only time you saw another human was when we bobbed up to see who
Sure.
else we could see, and of course we never saw anybody because they were always in their cubicle. To how environments are being built now, which to your point, it's the community feel, and
Mm,
even better when the organisation is encouraging family to come in. I mean, the joke is at the moment you'll have a
mm,
desk, a bed under the desk, and we'll never leave.
mhm,
But why would that necessarily be a bad thing
mhm,
if we're thriving in that environment? Again, if it's keeping us trapped to the exclusion of other parts that are important, like my ballroom dancing, my playing for the local symphony orchestra, these are things that energize me and allow me to be even more successful in my work part of my life.
mm,
But if you do that to the exclusion, then again, you're missing out on the holistic and the best version of me, or the best
right.
version of you that we can become.
Hmm. So another huge topic is loyalties, and this is another point that you bring up in the book that I really loved. You say that 63% of participants stated that the quality in this particular survey, that the quality of the relationship with their direct manager impacted their level of satisfaction on the job. The psychological contract is no more. Welcome to the social contract. Can you expand on that?
Hmm. Well, this goes back to the engagement data that Gallup and many other organizations have been researching for years. And HR professionals know when they do exit interviews that people leave not just for career advancement, but they leave because of a poor quality relationship with their colleagues, a poor quality relationship with their boss, or a poor quality relationship with their customers. And it goes back to our earlier part of the conversation that relationships really matter.
Hmm.
So when we want loyalty, if we want a highly engaged workforce, posters and trust falls and team building activities, they're not enough. We need to look at the day-to-day interactions of how business gets done so that I feel connected to you. I'm seeking you out in advance of the fire drill, and also building that level of trust that we can work together and collaborate, especially on the tough days when things aren't going to plan.
You mentioned you also it's about the quality of the team experience, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and Google, interestingly, has done a lot of research around what makes for a high
Mm,
performing team.
mhm,
And they also ascribed in the past to the 20th century mindset of let's put the smartest people together or similar personalities together, and we're bound to have a high performing team.
mm,
And yet, of course, the reality is no. And with Project Aristotle, they looked at what makes for a high performing team within their environment. And what they found was it was the quality of the working relationships, the ability to sit down at the start of a project or as we move through our careers and essentially contract for how are we going to work together. It's the soft, fluffy stuff that we've always ignored because it's misperceived as soft and fluffy
mm.
that actually allows us to get the hard results.
You
And if we
mentioned
don't talk about it, it doesn't work.
right. So these
Yeah.
relationship with colleagues, and I love it. People got to read this thing. It's really good stuff. So in the book, also you mentioned a tribal attitude cannot survive. Building relationships and connections quickly and paying attention to how we bond so that everyone included is paramount.
Yes, that's it. I mean, we've seen it in diversity and inclusion. The needle has barely moved for
Hmm.
women in senior roles, for minorities in senior roles. It's an
Hmm.
even more depressing picture. And diversity actually isn't the issue. The planet is diverse. We
Hmm.
have all the diversity that we need. And
Hmm.
inclusion, the affirmative
Hmm.
action plans and the quotas, okay,
Hmm.
that got us a seat at the table. But if we didn't feel like we belonged, if we don't connect, if we aren't allowed to connect with our colleagues through the locker room behavior that we've seen in the headlines even this year, then I'm not going to stay. at the table, even though that door has been opened. And so I think we've been looking at diversity and inclusion at the wrong levels. And this whole connection piece, the belonging piece, the cultivating the relationship, it's the missing piece that I think really can transform the diversity, the inclusion, the global mindset that's needed to ensure success.
Very interesting. It's so interesting how these things are evolving. Just when we thought we were at a point with all these posters and the trust falls that we were evolved,
Yeah.
that we were solving. And now it's like, oh God, there's another layer. There's tons of other layers that we're realizing now. It's incredible.
It is.
So one of the key questions in Gallup's engagement research is, do I have a best friend at work? And this one really interested me too, because it's such a simple notion. Effective professional relationships are not just a nice to have, they're a need to have. There's a clear correlation, you say, between a positive answer to this question in higher employee engagement, productivity, and retention.
Yes, and it's funny because that question causes more people to recoil than any other, and even Gallup acknowledged that, and they've deliberately left it in there with that wording. And to be honest, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I also had this is a workplace, British stiff upper lip, this is not a place for friends. But again, this concept of having an ally, call the best friend what you like. It's your go-to person that when you've had a tough day, you can go in their office, Adolfo, shut the door and go, oh my goodness, just happened. And know that you're not going to gossip about it. You're not going to judge me. And then you and I can talk about it and you'll coach me through it. But also, it's not just the group hug and the fan club. If I mess up, you're not just going to water down the feedback to me, Adolfo. You're going to go, yeah, Morag, you messed up. That sucked as much as you thought it did. And here's what you need to do to come back from it. And so that best friend is vital to building a team that is cohesive, because it's easy to be successful when things are going to plan.
That sounds
but it's like much more challenging. Well, not to that extreme, but it is much harder to be successful when things are challenging. And you talked about the startup environment that Silicon Valley has, but that crosses the gamut of industries. If you've got a team that trusts that we're all pulling in the same direction, that if I make a mistake, you're not going to use it as the case for the prosecution, but we're all going to rally around and fix it and learn from it and move on, then that encourages informed risk taking. It encourages me to say, hey, you know what? I've never done this sort of project before. I'm nervous. What should we do? And if we aren't doing that, then we're only giving 80% of ourselves. And therefore, you're probably only getting at best 80% of the results that you're aspiring to.
Gosh, there's so many pitfalls in that scenario right there that you just mentioned too, because you said trying new things. Oftentimes it was in big enterprise, people did not want to try new things because, there's a learning, steps that need to be made, mistakes that need to be made in order to learn something new. And you typically get penalized for those type of things.
Absolutely. And as adults, it's interesting that we avoid being the newbie. We wear that mask of invincibility. And every time we get promoted into a new role or join a new team or join a new company, we are the newbie. And there's a simple exercise that I'll sometimes do with teams where I'll ask you to draw a picture of how you got to where you are today. No words, just pictures. And I've done this with mining engineers. I've done it with PhD scientists. I've done it with, C-level to new entrants. And I guarantee the first reaction is, you want me to draw? I can't draw. I suck at drawing.
Yeah.
And the whole point is less about the quality of the drawing. It's the story that goes behind it, because invariably we'll do it and we'll find that you and I have grown up in the same place, went to the same school, maybe know the same people. Every time those connections become clearer. Yet if you take that same activity to an elementary school and you say to a group of kids, draw me a picture, their hands are immediately, do you want it in pen? Do you want it in crayon? Do you want it in pencil? There's no question about whether I'm good or bad.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
No hesitation.
That's what we want, is a team where we're not afraid to be the newbie. We're excited to learn and grow together.
So that also that goes beyond the surface stuff, because just because, for example, I bring up this notion of startups, and oftentimes people who are not from the Valley look at it like, oh, they got it so good with their beanbags and their video games and their and all that stuff. But then I often hear about people that are very unhappy in those situations because they aren't included they don't feel like engaged in all those things. And oftentimes they just feel trapped.
Yes, and I think as much as beanbag slides and ping pong tables are held up as the vision of the new workplace, certainly when I've worked with my Silicon Valley clients, they actually don't get a lot of use because people are busy doing the work versus the sliding down the fireman pole or whatever.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
it goes back to a simple question as to, if you were joining my team, sitting down with you and welcoming you and saying, okay, Adolfo, what are you most excited for? What are you most afraid of? What are your hot buttons and what might push them? Not so that I can learn to push them, but so that I can learn to avoid them. Or if I see them being pushed, I can say, hey, how do we reduce the risk of, of an outburst that isn't going to help us move forward? Again, it comes back to the soft skills, the relationship piece, how business gets done. That's what undermines success every time. It's never usually that the product, service, or startup was not a good idea. It was just that we couldn't rally around to actually deliver it in an effective way, in a way that us as users wanted to purchase and take advantage of it.
This seems, all of this relationship building and this type of personal engagement and understanding and including each other, it seems like a big challenge when it comes to this new type of work paradigm, in terms of no more term work sort of security, how we're floating in and out of these jobs. Can you touch on that?
Well, it's interesting because I was working with an engineering firm earlier this week. We were planning an emotional intelligence workshop for PhD engineers, by the way. And they actually have tenured employees of 30, 40 years, which is still pretty unusual. But I use myself as an example. I've had 5 careers in my 30 years in the workplace. And certainly research shows that what's currently described as the gig economy and misunderstood as taking advantage of individuals, within the next 5 to 10 years, the research is showing that 50% of roles will become more of an independent contractor type arrangement. And so that, again, that's where the psychological contract employer-employee changes, because now, as Reid Hoffman wrote in The Alliance, it's a tour of duty. I come and work at Nerdstalker for 6 months or a year to do a specific project. And then there is a definitive decision that says, do we extend it? Do you move me to a new project? Or am I going off to a new tour of duty elsewhere? And again, that was described as job hopping and disloyalty in the 20th century. In the 21st century, if you can tell the story of learning and growth, that makes you a very compelling, in my experience and in the research we did for the book, employee for the future.
Fascinating. Regardless if it's a distributed team or not?
Well, working globally, again, this is the thanks technology. In the past, you were part of the local talent pool. Now we're all part of the global talent pool. So if we aren't staying up to date with technology, and if we aren't getting used to it, like you and I doing this interview, and we're 1,000 miles apart, this is the way forward. We are going to be working with colleagues who we may never meet in the same physical location. So how do we build a relationship when we can't go for a pint after work, or play a game of ping pong at lunchtime, or sit in the beanbags? We have to come up with a different way to have fun and connect, so that we can trust that the work is going to be done effectively and the handoffs are effectively.
So what I love about the book too is, and let's talk about some of the solutions, the actual tactical solutions, is that you do offer tactical solutions in the breakdown. In between like certain chapters and stuff, you have various bullet points, right, of questions that you ask, and sort of Q&A type of stuff. Can you expand on that for people that are looking to, to improve their company, or et cetera?
Well, that's what Dr. Lyndon Sharkey and I wanted to do differently. Is it's easy to pontificate, but what we wanted to do in the book is to start everybody on the journey to updating their mindset and approach. So as you say, each chapter ends with 2 sections. One is some questions around how do you future-proof your organization? And the second is around how do you future-proof your career? And in the consulting work, in the workshops and the diagnostics that we've now been doing with our clients, we're actually helping to customize those recommendations and solutions for each individual, each team, and each organization, because the recommendations I might give to you might be different to the next host that I speak to or the next company that I speak to. But the reality is it doesn't cost millions and it doesn't take months of work. It takes a conversation between you and your colleagues to start this journey to future-proofing the workplace.
Wonderful. So a really hot topic right now, and or maybe it has been for a while, maybe it's not so hot anymore, is this notion of millennials and Generation Z, if you will, right? Which a lot of Generation Xers like myself and other generations have, oftentimes sort of maligned in a way. I would say they've kind of given them a bad rap, in my opinion, to some extent, because there's always the previous generation that's saying, they don't work hard enough, or et cetera. In my day, we, whatever, hauled coal for miles, and et cetera, et cetera. But it seems like we're evolving with this generation to me, I love how this generation now isn't tolerating employment without purpose to some extent, right? Can you expand on millennials, Generation Z in general, and the sort of the future sort of trending that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, when I'm not rolling my eyes at work-life balance, I'm rolling my eyes at this whole generation malarkey, because we include in that chapter a quote from Socrates that essentially goes along the lines of the youth of today are rude, indolent, etc., etc. So this issue of the next generation not being like us has been around for millennia and will continue to be so. And I look at it this way: as if they're not pushing our buttons and pushing the envelope, then we as parents or aunts, uncles, friends of the family, we've done our job wrong. And be careful, millennials, because you're going to be that middle-aged person before you know it.
Very soon.
So as a Generation X also, I look at my teenage boys, and here's what's strikingly different. So you and I went to school, and it was textbook learning, and it was memorizing. And you remember how we got the Casio calculator watch, and we thought we were really cool,
that
right?
was so cool, yeah.
So we talk about learning in the book. We're still on an 18-year from entering school to leaving university education process. We're still hung up about 4-year degrees, 18 years. And yet Moore's law, 18 months for computing power to double. So you've got a tortoise and hare situation.
Right.
And with Google, why is the student, my kids know more at 19 than I did at 19 a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And essentially, we don't need to memorize it. As long as I know what keywords to insert, if I can get my answer through Google or whichever search engine I use, if I can differentiate between fact and fiction, then take that information, synthesize it, and apply it to my problem, modify it as needed, that's the way of learning and the way of the future, and why the millennials know no different and seem so different to us. So what we're seeing is a shift from textbook depth of learning to the nano degrees, bite-sized learning, the just-in-time learning. And that's kind of scary to those of us who've got, the diploma and everything else that proves, look, how much we've learned, when it's now nimble and agile. But this is another industry and another mindset. If you want to stay future-proof, agile learning and lifelong learning is going to be critical for all of us, for you and for I.
So are you familiar with the notion of Agile in general, how it's being deployed within companies?
Yeah, about 80% of my clients are IT, technology, and engineering. So Agile, or the various flavors of it, is something that we encounter every day.
Very interesting. So one thing I want to know also, Morag, is what are your go-forward plans? Now, we have this wonderful book, The Future-Proof Workplace, that you all need to buy multiple copies of for your family. What are you working on next?
Well, what we're working on actually is being able to respond to all the requests for help that we're getting from our clients who want to future-proof their organization.
Right.
So at the moment, that's starting a number of different conversations around, well, where are we on this journey? And of the 6 factors that Linda and I explore in the book, where are we up to date and going well? And what's holding us back? And what's the inertia that's getting in the way? And so we're working with clients to overcome those obstacles and accelerate accelerate their success. And we're doing the same at a team level. If your organization isn't ready to do it, we can work with your function, whether it's the technology function, the HR function, the sales function, or just within your team, to say, are you all on the same page as to what success looks like and how you can navigate in a more agile way through your organization, its bureaucracy, and lead the charge for the future. And then finally, we're doing some work individually as executive coaches, again, helping those who may be early in their career. How do I get ready for a career lattice versus a career ladder? Or for those like you and I who might be mid-career, how do I reinvent myself, and how do I anticipate the potential risks of automation and artificial intelligence that are coming our way, so that I can see a long-term future, so that I can thrive and continue to add value?
That was a a couple of very interesting points that you make in the book. I love the analogy of the ladder and the lattice too, and the increase. We're seeing an increase these flat organizations, as you mentioned, and everyone is very concerned with things like AI, and I am greatly concerned with this. How do you see that sort of rolling out? For me, it's terrifying in the sense that so much employment is dependent upon. I can see called out as a technologist. I know how we can automate things, and I've seen things that just equal job loss to one extent, right?
It's exciting and terrifying. I mean, I look at the potential for the Internet of Things and how it's going to exponentially impact how we experience life. But there are a couple of things that come through it from that. My flippant answer is we don't need to worry too much yet, because certainly my Bluetooth phone can't cope with my accent. So until it can cope with my accent, no worries. But I also recognize that that is the flippant response.
Right.
So the Internet of Things has a whole load of possibilities. But here's where society, and this is a bigger question, needs to think about it. Because if the short-term goal of automation and AI is to remove me as a cost as an employee, that's great. You'll save that money in the short term. But if I'm not earning, then I have no money to spend. So your AI can create everything it wants, but I'm not going to buy it because I'm not earning.
Right.
So there is a disconnect, but I don't think we've thought through the medium and longer term implications of, so how do you move value, i.e. money, as it is at the moment, through the economy, so that even if automated production, there is still value that I can afford to buy what's being made.
That's such an interesting topic too, because it's so taboo to even discuss sometimes with certain people. Because you get into economics and that type of thing, and some people even look at this, as you mentioned, of increasing productivity and increasing profitability without the cost of human capital or whatever. Some people they pose it as more as like, no, Morag, we're freeing you up to be more creative on your own, you know?
And that's true. I mean, the World Economic Forum was saying that the skills that we value in the workplace, 50% of those skills will be different in 5-10 years' time. Well, I think that's the normal cycle of work anyway. But what they are seeing is that what is remaining critical, what employers, whatever industry, are calling for, it's the interpersonal skills, it's the critical thinking, it's the creativity, it's the communication with heart that we haven't yet been able to program reliably into the robotics, the automation that's happening right now. So I think there is still decades of opportunity, but there are also case studies. I mean, you look at Detroit, the car industry. We need to help people to reskill from what they may have started to do for the new emerging economies, so that they can shift versus potentially getting trapped through no fault of their own because that work has migrated elsewhere or been replaced.
In technology, it seems like we're so incredibly fast now at bringing this change that people often come back with this rebuttal of, well, the horse and buggy, you know, that whole analogy, and how it took X amount of time to get from, you know, out to this manufacturing society and cars, et cetera. But now the spike isn't as gradual, it seems like then. It's a hockey stick now in terms of technology.
It definitely is. I mean, you think about the statistics that I came across was that it was 75 years for the original landline phone to become ubiquitous, or at least common. Well, Pokemon Go had more than 1 million subscribers in less than 24 hours. I mean, it's that
incredible. Yeah.
quick. And so, yeah, this is why this conversation is so important. We can't wait till tomorrow or next year or next decade. The future of work is today. The time to take action is today, because the longer you wait, the bigger the catch up you have to do before you even start to pull even with your colleagues and with others.
So, Morag, one of the things that we like to ask is, what advice would you have given yourself if you were this kid coming out of school?
If I had given myself the advice 30 years ago.
Besides invest in Google or Amazon.
Oh God, those would have been good ones, wouldn't they? Yes.
As like an entrepreneur and someone, who's doing what you do now.
So I think, certainly I would have invested in my professional relationships much sooner and nurtured and maintained them from an earlier day. Whereas as I moved careers, I just moved to a new pocket of colleagues, and the others we may have met, but that was it. I was focused on the new and focused on the new. Now I recognize that it's not 6 degrees of separation, it's 2 degrees of connection. And it now continues to amaze me how I can travel. I'm off to Zurich in a couple of weeks, and then I'm in New York. I guarantee I am going to bump into somebody that I know or has seen me speak at a conference or has read the book. That is going to happen a couple of times on each of those trips, even though I'm traveling to a foreign country, etc.
Wow.
And so that's the advice, is it's never too soon to start nurturing those relationships, because you and we may be on a first date today, but if you invite me back on the show in 6 months or a year, we've got a relationship that we can build on. And who knows, in the corporate or the working environment, peers today, boss tomorrow. So start paying attention to the relationships and how business gets done, not just the what of the business you happen to be in today. Well, that's the advice.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful piece of advice. We're to end there. So, Morag, where can we get more information about you, what you're doing, the book, and all things future-proof workplace?
Okay, so yes, thank you, Adolfo. So you can get the book from any great retailer, and they're all great retailers. I don't know why we put the good in front. But as a special thank you to you and your listeners, if you go to our website, futureproofworkplace.com, we have a 40% discount off retail for US-based subscribers.
Oh, wow.
But to learn more, go there, futureproofworkplace.com, or by all means, please come and find me at skyeteam.com, SKYE team.com, and that's where you can learn all about me and my team and our work in building high-performing leaders, teams, and organizations.
Great. All right, we will add all those links and everything to the show notes for all you people out there. Again, I am Adolfo Fronda at Nerdstalker on Twitter. We thank you for watching Nerdstalker. You can go to nerdstalker.com on iTunes and subscribe on YouTube and do the thumbs up and the 5 stars and the whole thing. All right, everyone, thanks for your time, and we hope we provided value to you. Thanks so much for being on the show.